Mrs. Secretary, thanks for joining us this morning. I want to get right to the news. 2.4 million new jobless claims of unemployment this morning. Several Senate Republicans said yesterday they want to see some action now on the next relief package. Is another package necessary? And if so, when?
Well, let me just comment, first of all, I'm very sympathetic to the people who are not working at no fault of their own because we've closed down the economy. And as we slowly reopen the economy in a safe way, we'll get people back to work. And in the current CARES package, there's several parts of it that are designed to help those American workers. One is obviously the PPP and getting people back to work through that process. The other is the economic impact payments, which are the direct payments. And then finally, the enhanced unemployment insurance, which we do need to fix the quirk that in certain cases we're actually paying people more than they made. So we need to fix that. We're going to carefully review the next few weeks. I think there is a strong likelihood we will need another bill, but we just have $3 trillion we're pumping into the economy, and we're going to step back for a few weeks and think very clearly how we need to spend more money and if we need to do that.
As you know, Mrs. Secretary, the House passed a $3 trillion bill that is strongly opposed by the administration and congressional Republicans. You have a very good relationship with Speaker Pelosi, the president, not so much. But when is the last time you've communicated with the Speaker about a possible next package?
Well, I spoke to the Speaker last week. Really, our conversation was really more about the execution of the current CARES Act and was not focused on the next steps. What I would say is, look, I'm very pleased that the last two bills that were passed were 96-0 and 100-0 in the Senate. They had overwhelming bipartisan support. I mean, this is really extraordinary times. The whole Senate came together, and I would hope that the next bill we do has overwhelming bipartisan support. And the Speaker's bill obviously is a partisan bill, so that's not something we're focusing on at the moment.
You mentioned before the Senate Banking Committee that this is an unprecedented challenge, and as you mentioned, this is no fault of Americans. This virus started in China. It was not contained. They were not transparent. Mr. Secretary, a lot of Americans are angry, and they're angry at China. Is China going to be held accountable in any way?
Well, I understand why Americans are angry, and I think they have the right to be angry. And it's not just Americans, it's the rest of the world. And I would start with people want information. People want to know what went on with the virus. And I think that China should be held accountable first by at least giving information and understanding what went on and how to combat this.
President Trump has talked about a transportation bill, the possibility of it being a stimulus down the road. Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, is not a big fan of that approach. Should Congress at some point this year, for another stimulus, pass some type of transportation bill?
Well, I think, as you know, the president's been very focused on infrastructure going back to the campaign, and that was part of the president's platform to rebuild our roads, our bridges, our dams, and the nation's infrastructure, as well as cutting-edge infrastructure such as rural broadband. So I think that's something that Congress is going to need to look at. I'd say whether we do it as part of the coronavirus bill or whether we do it separately, that's something that is on the president's agenda.
You are an author of this PPP program, an unprecedented program that has saved many, many jobs. How many jobs has the PPP program saved to this date?
I think it's about 50 million jobs, and I think by the time we get through this, it'll be 60 million jobs. And it wasn't perfect getting up and running, but what was important was we developed a program from scratch. We knew that if it took 4 months to get up and running, it wasn't going to help at all. It was unprecedented. We got this up in a few weeks. We got money out the door. And this is a major part of the U.S. economy, is small and medium-sized businesses. And we wanted to protect the workers. And just as important, we wanted to keep those workers attached to the business so that when the businesses could safely open, they had the workers attached to them.
As you know, Congress has replenished the PPP. When will the PPP need to be replenished again? How much time do we have?
Well, right now we have over $100 billion left in it. One of the things we are working with Congress on, and there is bipartisan support, is lengthening the 8-week period. One of the things that companies are having an issue with is because they've been closed and they're rehiring workers. I know there's bipartisan support to extend that to 10 or 12 weeks. I know the restaurants had asked for 24 weeks, but that's something we definitely want to fix. Doesn't cost us any more money, and there is bipartisan support.
As far as that 8-week provision, as you mentioned, Congress is talking about that. There are some that say that you could do that administratively. Can you do that administratively as well as a 75-25 provision, or does that have to be done by Congress, both of them?
Well, the 8 weeks I wish I could do administratively. If I could, we'd already do it. Now, let me just comment on the 75-25, because I think there's been a little bit of confusion on this issue. So when the program was designed, and again, let me just remind people, it's called the Paycheck Protection Program. It's not called the Overhead Protection Program. It was designed that you got 8 weeks of payroll plus 25% for overhead, which we thought was a reasonable amount. But the real purpose here was to get people back to work. When we came up with the 75% test, it was just a belt and suspender test, is what we thought is how the program was designed, which again was the 8 weeks plus the 25%. We did not think the intent of the program was to have 50% spent on workers and 50% spent on overhead. And obviously we're somewhat concerned. I mean, we realize people do have more overhead. They can go out and take an EIDL loan, which is a 30-year SBA loan to pay back. But we want most of this money to go to workers. And that we believe that the 75% was exactly consistent with the way the program was designed.
There are roughly around 30 companies, public companies, that say they won't return the money that they've received in this loan grant program. They say that the goalposts have been changed. Will you go after these companies, and why, if it is saving jobs after all?
Well, let me just comment that there was a certification that was in the application that the funds were necessary. And as I've said before, there were a few companies that kind of became the poster child for the public being upset. I've said this before, I'm a big fan of the Los Angeles Lakers. They're one of my favorite teams. We did not envision this was a program for the Los Angeles Lakers. They obviously have the financial means to pay their players and pay their support staff. Also, as you look at Shake Shack, which was a large public company, again, they have the financial means. Whether they want to pay their people or not is completely up to them. But I don't think those were the types of companies that we thought could make the certification. So I came out early in defending the program. And again, it was a small number of companies in what's over 4.5 million loans. This is a small number of companies that jeopardized the program. And we did say that we would review and hold accountable anybody who has a loan over 2 million. Now, I think some legitimate companies got very concerned about the liability. So we toned that down and we said, okay, well, if you go through your review and you pay back the money, the SBA will not refer you to any other further enforcement actions. But yes, the bigger loans will be reviewed. They'll be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Companies can make their arguments, no different than you'd go through any review.
There's a lawsuit pending about the non-public companies. Media organizations have said they deserve the right to see who is getting this taxpayer money. Do you agree with that the public deserves to know who's getting the money, whether they're public or not public?
Well, let me just comment. I very much support oversight and transparency. And when we negotiated this bipartisan bill, we added in unprecedented oversight and transparency. We created a new inspector general for various parts of this. We created an oversight committee as bipartisan. And in the Fed programs, we specifically agreed within 14 days to release the names of companies. And that was something there was interest in. I think in the PPP, it does not require disclosure. And I think the concern was that there is proprietary information because it's tied off of payroll that should not be in the public domain. But again, that's something that will be discussed.
Mr. Secretary, speaking of oversight, the House has set up a special panel that congressional Republicans opposed. They say it's not necessary to oversee this specific committee because there's a lot of other oversight built into the law. If you were asked to testify before this House panel, would you?
I can't comment on that. I haven't really reviewed it one way or another with my internal legal team and others. What I would say is I testified this week at the Senate Banking Committee with Chairman Jay Powell. That is required on a quarterly basis. We absolutely plan on doing that. And again, I would just emphasize there's a specific oversight committee that was set up that consists of Republicans and Democrats. I'm not exactly sure why the House needs to set up another committee. And again, there are other committees that the House does have jurisdiction that Chair Powell and I will testify before.
CBO recently has predicted that unemployment will be 10% plus this year into next. Do you agree with that prediction?
Well, let me just comment, and this is nothing against CBO, and this is nothing against the rest of the economic models. We're in an unprecedented situation. This unemployment was not a result of bad economic issues. This is a result of medical issues. So I think it's very hard to predict. A lot of it depends on the reopening of the economy. A lot of it depends on as we make advances in virals, vaccines, and testing, and people feel comfortable. So I think the economic models, quite frankly, follow the medical models. And I think it's too premature to predict those things. What I do think is the second quarter is obviously going to be a dreadful quarter because literally it's like we took the water faucet and we turned it off. So nothing came through. And now we're slowly reopening the economy. So I think we will bottom out in the second quarter. I think the third and fourth quarter will be better. And as the president has said, and I have said, with the great advancement in medical progress in killing this virus, we expect our economy will be great again next year.
You said this spring that the fourth quarter would be gigantic. Are you tempering expectations? Do you still think it'll be gigantic in the fourth quarter?
Again, I'm not tempering. What I'm saying is when you come off of a low number of closing down the economy, you're going to have very, very big increases. So, yes, I think you're going to see a very large, call it a gigantic increase in the fourth quarter.
Regarding production, some have called the administration to use more of the Defense Production Act, which the administration has employed. But does the administration plan to do more of that as far as manufacturing? So a lot of people say we need that now, or certainly we're going to need it down the road in the fall going into next year.
Well, it's a very important tool. It should be used carefully. I know the president is very much willing to use it if we need to use it. I got an update on vaccines yesterday and the investments that BARDA is making, which I think is really terrific. And in many cases, they have commitments to take over large amounts of the vaccines. But the Defense Production Act is a very important tool to protect the American workers. And if the president needs to use it, he will.
Mr. Secretary, the president has been very critical of the Postal Service, which is running out of money. There's provisions in the new House bill that I know is considered dead in the Senate. But the president has said the Postal Service should charge more for carriers like Amazon and others. Do you think that should be looked at, and maybe the Postal Service should charge Amazon more?
Well, we've already looked at this, so let me just give you the history here. I chair the Federal Financing Bank. The Post Office is the largest creditor of the Federal Financing Bank. So last year, I asked my team to give me a financial update. I was shocked at how bad it was. I updated the president on that. As a result of that, he asked me to chair a task force And we've put together a complete plan to fix the post office. Let me also just say, when we came into office, there were no governors. Again, this is just outrageous. This is kind of corporate 101. There was no oversight on the post office. So the Postal Board of Governors didn't have anybody. We now have a fully functioning governance board, people appointed by Congress, both sides of the aisle. I think that's extremely important. They ran a search. They've just hired a new postmaster general, someone with terrific business experience. And during the last bill, people thought the post office was going to run out of money, so they wanted to throw the post office $10 billion. I said, that's not fair. Let's give them a loan if they need more money. The good news is, as of now, the package deliveries are up over 50% to offset the mail. As of now, they don't need to use the loan. So I absolutely think the president is right. We want transparency on these agreements. We want to make sure that, again, any of the e-commerce transactions, and again, right now, post office is doing an amazing job delivering things to people as they're at home, an amazing job. We just want to make sure that the post office is paid fairly and isn't subsidizing that business. The first-class mail business is a business that should be subsidized. The package business, and again, what I'm talking about is the overnight package business. I'm not talking about if you take your package to the post office and send it cross country. What I'm talking about is the overnight business that services Amazon, eBay, and others. That shouldn't be subsidized by taxpayers.
An unusual program has come out of the State Department. It's been reported, it's called the Eagle Plan, where Social Security recipients could get a $5,000 or $10,000 payment in exchange for reducing their retirement benefits down the road. It's very odd this has come out of the State Department. Is this something that's going to come out from the administration? Democrats have been critical of it.
No, it's not something that we're considering at this point. It did come out of the economics group, and we look at lots of things. I think, as you know, Social Security is very important to the president, and we'll look at other options if people need money.
The president and vice president have been tested regularly. Have you been tested, and will you continue to be tested in the weeks ahead?
I am also tested on a regular basis because I am in pretty much daily contact with the president, the vice president, and others. The White House has thought it's prudent. And these Abbott machines, it's a very easy process. I hope we can get more and more of these Abbott machines into the workforce. I think in many places, if people could go into work and could get tested, they'd be much more confident in going to work. But yes, just as a precaution, because I'm around the president on a regular basis, I do get tested.
Last question, Mr. Secretary. How much is...
report, I don't have it.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much.